a merchant's son, stood on a beach near the Piraeus, watching the wine-dark water surrender, one by one, the shattered timbers of the vessel that had carried his fortune in Phoenician purple from Citium toward the markets of Athens. He had been a rich man at dawn, and was, by the slow accounting of that afternoon, a man with nothing but the salt drying on his hands and the clothes the sea had not stripped from him. He walked, because there was nothing else to be done, into the city and into a bookseller's shop, and there he opened, almost at random, the second book of Xenophon's Memorabilia. What he read in that shop, he would later say, was the beginning of his life. He asked the bookseller where such men as the one described in the pages, men like Socrates, might be found. The bookseller, at that very moment, saw the philosopher Crates passing in the street and pointed and said, "Follow that man." And Zeno of Citium, the shipwrecked merchant, followed. He would say, decades later, when he had become the founder of a school that would shape the moral imagination of Greece and Rome for half a millennium, that he made a prosperous voyage when he suffered shipwreck. The Greek is plain. He used the verb of trading, the verb of commerce, the language of the ledger he had once kept. The wreck, he said, had been profit. This is the principle we will sit with today. Loss as the seed of philosophy. The proposition, strange to the modern ear and stranger still when one considers how thoroughly we have been trained to insulate ourselves against every kind of loss, that the philosophical life begins not in abundance but in subtraction, that the man who has never lost anything has, in a certain precise sense, never yet had occasion to think. Let us reflect on what Zeno is saying, because the saying is easy to mistake. He is not saying that loss is good. He is not saying that the merchant ought to be grateful in some forced and performative way for the destruction of his goods. He is not offering consolation in the manner of a friend, patting the bereaved on the shoulder and insisting that everything happens for a reason. Zeno would have had little patience for such talk, and his pupils less. What he is saying is more austere and more useful than consolation. He is saying that the structure of his old life had been invisible to him. The cargo, the routes, the ledgers, the calculations of profit and risk, the careful conservatorship of inherited wealth, all of this had functioned as a kind of weather around him, which he had taken for the very shape of the world. He had not seen it because he had been inside it. The shipwreck stripped the weather away. Suddenly, he could see what he had been doing. Suddenly, the question arose, what is a life actually for? And what does a man actually need? And the question could arise because the answers he had been living by, the answers of the merchant class of Citium, had been dissolved by the sea. Diogenes Laertius, in his Lives of the Eminent Philosophers, preserves the saying in this form. Zeno, he writes, used to say, "Now that I have suffered shipwreck, I have made a good voyage." Or, in another rendering, "I sailed well when I was wrecked." The principle has a name in the later Stoic tradition, though Zeno himself, so far as we can tell, did not give it one. The principle is that adversity reveals, that the things we call misfortunes are, in the more careful accounting of the philosopher, occasions of disclosure. They show us what we had not been seeing. They show us sometimes that what we had thought was a life was only an arrangement of circumstances, and that the life proper had not yet begun. It is thus that Seneca, 3 centuries later, writing to his friend Lucilius from his villa or from his exile, returns again and again to this same idea. It is thus that Epictetus, the slave-become teacher, will tell his students in Nicopolis that the storm is not the misfortune but the opportunity. The line runs from the beach at the Piraeus through the entire history of the school, and it begins with a young Phoenician merchant who lost everything and discovered in the losing what he had not known he was looking for. But to understand the principle, one must understand the man, and to understand the man, one must walk for a moment in the city he walked into. Athens in the late 4th century, before the Common Era, was no longer the Athens of Pericles. The age of empire had passed. The wars with Sparta had ended in disaster, and the long convalescence had been interrupted by the rise of Macedon, by the conquests of Alexander, by the wars of his successors that broke the Greek world into kingdoms. Athens was still a city of philosophy. The academy founded by Plato still kept its grounds, and the Lyceum founded by Aristotle still kept its colonnade, and the Cynics, in their deliberate poverty, still kept the streets. But the city had grown smaller in its own estimation. It had become a city where men came to learn rather than to rule. Into this city Zeno came sometime around 312 before the Common Era, perhaps a little earlier, perhaps a little later. The sources are not precise. He was, by the various accounts, a tall man, thin, with a twisted neck. His complexion was dark, and his bearing, even before he became a philosopher, had something austere about it. He was, by birth, a Phoenician, from Citium, on the southern coast of Cyprus, a city of mixed Greek and Phoenician population. His father, Menascius, had been a merchant, and Zeno had been raised in the family trade. He had, by all accounts, been good at it. The cargo that went down in the wreck had been substantial. He was not a poor man who became a philosopher because he had no other options. He was a successful man who chose philosophy after the option of continuing as he had been was taken from him. He attached himself first, as we have seen, to Crates of Thebes, the Cynic. Crates was a peculiar teacher. The Cynics held that virtue alone was sufficient for happiness, and that all the conventions of society, including wealth, reputation, and even basic modesty, were obstacles to the philosophical life. Crates dressed in rags. He slept in porticos. He was, by his own choice, what Zeno had been made by accident. The young Zeno, we are told, was uncomfortable with the Cynic style. Diogenes Laertius preserves a story, perhaps apocryphal, in which Crates, wishing to teach Zeno not to care about appearances, asked him to carry a pot of lentil soup through the Ceramicus, the potter's quarter of the city. Zeno, embarrassed, tried to hide the pot under his cloak. Crates struck the pot with his staff. The soup poured down Zeno's legs. The young man ran, and Crates, calling after him, said, "Why do you run, my little Phoenician? Nothing terrible has happened to you." The story may not be true, but it captures something. Zeno was not, by temperament, a cynic. He could not embrace the deliberate provocation, the calculated rudeness, the public disregard for ordinary decency that the Cynic life required. He wanted something more measured. He wanted a philosophy that could be lived without abandoning the world entirely. He studied next with Stilpo of Megara and with Xenocrates and Polemo at the academy. He read widely. He took from each school what he could use. And then, around 300 before the Common Era, he began to teach on his own, in a public colonnade on the north side of the Athenian Agora. The colonnade was called the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch, because its walls bore frescoes by the great painter Polygnotus, depicting the battles of Marathon and the sack of Troy. The school he founded took its name from the place. They were called simply the men of the Stoa, the Stoics. He lived by all accounts with great simplicity. He drank water. He ate bread and figs and honey. He wore a thin cloak, even in winter. The Athenians, who had a long memory for the manners of their philosophers, came to respect him deeply. The city eventually voted him a golden crown and a public tomb, and the decree that survives, preserved in Diogenes, praises him for having made his own life an example to his pupils in conformity with the doctrines he taught. He never returned to Citium. He never resumed the trade. When King Antigonus of Macedon, an admirer, invited him to court, he sent 2 of his pupils instead, pleading age. He died in Athens, an old man, around 262 before the Common Era, by his own account, having lived well. Now, what we want to understand is this: how did the principle, loss as the seed of philosophy, function in his actual life? Not as a saying he could utter, but as a structure he could inhabit. Because it is one thing to say, after the fact, that the shipwreck was profitable. It is another thing to live that saying through the long decades that followed. Consider first what he did not do. He did not return to Citium. He did not write home for funds. He did not, so far as we know, attempt to recover any portion of the cargo that the sea had taken. He did not lament. He did not, even in his later years, when he could have done so without shame, narrate the wreck as a tragedy from which he had recovered. He narrated it as a beginning. This is the first movement of the principle. The man who has suffered loss and who has understood what Zeno understood does not arrange his subsequent life around the loss as a wound to be tended. He arranges it around the loss as a door that opened. He does not look back through the door. He walks forward through it. Consider, second, the philosophy he built. The Stoic system, as Zeno articulated it, and as his successors Cleanthes and Chrysippus refined it, has at its center a distinction between what is up to us and what is not up to us. The distinction will be made most famously by Epictetus, who opens the Enchiridion with it. But the distinction is already there in Zeno, already foundational. What is up to us is our judgments, our intentions, our assents, our refusals. What is not up to us is everything else: the body, the reputation, the property, the cargo on the ship. It is impossible not to hear, in this distinction, the sound of timbers breaking in the surf. Zeno is building a philosophy that begins from the recognition that property can be taken from a man in an afternoon, that the ledger can be erased by weather, that the things a man calls his own are, in the strict accounting of the cosmos, on loan. He is building a philosophy in which the wise man cannot be ruined, because the wise man has not staked his happiness on what can be taken. He has staked it on what cannot be taken, on the use he makes of his own mind. The merchant who lost his cargo could not have invented this philosophy. The merchant before the wreck would have considered such a philosophy beautiful perhaps, but unnecessary. He had his cargo. He had his roots. He had no occasion to ask what would remain if the cargo were gone. The wreck created the occasion. The wreck made the question askable, and the question once asked could not be unasked. Consider, third, the manner of his teaching. Zeno did not teach in a private garden, as Epicurus did, behind walls. He taught in a public colonnade, in the most heavily trafficked part of the Athenian agora. His students sat with him while the business of the city went on around them. Merchants haggled, coins changed hands, cargoes were assessed, and bills of lading drawn up. The world Zeno had once belonged to passed daily before the school he had founded. He could see it. He could watch men doing what he had once done. And he could, without bitterness and without nostalgia, teach beside it. This is, I think, the deepest expression of the principle in his life. He had not fled the world of commerce. He had not denounced it. He had simply walked through it to something else, and now he stood at the threshold of that something else and instructed the young who came to him, while the old world hummed at his back. There is a phrase that surfaces in the later Stoics that bears on this. The phrase is the philosopher's progress. Stoicism is not a destination, but a movement. One does not arrive at being a Stoic. One progresses day by day toward the sage, who in the strict Stoic doctrine may never have existed and may never exist. The progress is the life, and the progress requires, as its initiating condition, some disturbance of the ordinary, some breaking of the surface of habitual existence, some occasion when the question of how to live can no longer be deferred. For Zeno, the disturbance was the wreck. For others, it has been other things: the death of a child, the collapse of a career, an illness that does not pass, a betrayal, an exile. The disturbance is not chosen, it comes. And what Zeno teaches us, by the example of his own life, is that when it comes, one has a choice about what to do with it. One can treat it as an interruption of the life one was meant to be living, in which case one will spend one's remaining years trying to repair the interruption and return to that meant life, which will never quite be reachable again. Or one can treat it as the beginning of the life one is actually going to live. He chose the second. What then is the structural lesson? Let us state it plainly, because the lesson can be lost in the biography. The lesson is not that you should hope for shipwreck. The lesson is not that loss is good. The lesson is not that gratitude for misfortune is the mark of the wise. Such formulations are sentimental, and Stoicism is not a sentimental philosophy. The lesson is this: the conditions of your ordinary life function as a kind of structure that conceals from you the questions you most need to ask. You have, at any given moment, a great many arrangements. You have habits of consumption, habits of work, habits of attention. You have a sense of who you are, which is largely a sense of what you do and what you have. These arrangements are, for the most part, invisible to you because you live inside them. You do not see them. You see through them. A loss, when it comes, can break the arrangement. It can make visible what had been invisible. It can confront you with the question, what is actually required for a life? And what had I merely been assuming was required? When such a loss comes, you have, in essence, two postures available. The first is the posture of restoration. You can devote yourself to repairing what was broken, to recovering what was lost, to returning to the arrangement as it stood before. This posture is natural. It is often what the world expects of you. It is also sometimes possible. The lost job is found again. The broken relationship mends. The illness passes, and the life resumes more or less as it had been. The second posture is the posture of inquiry. You can take the loss as an occasion to ask whether the arrangement, now broken, had been worth what you were paying for it. You can ask whether the life you had been living was the life you would, on reflection, have chosen. You can ask whether the cargo you had been carrying was cargo worth the carriage. The first posture is not wrong. There are losses that ought to be repaired. There are arrangements that, on inspection, were good arrangements, and the loss of which is a real loss. The Stoic is not asking you to despise what you had, but the Stoic is asking you to look, and the Stoic is observing that the looking is most possible, sometimes only possible, when the loss has already happened. Before the loss, you cannot easily see the arrangement. After the loss, you can. The window is narrow. Most people, in the experience of loss, close the window quickly because to keep it open is uncomfortable. They reach for the restoration, or for the consolation, or for the distraction. They do not let the question stand. Zeno let the question stand. He walked into a bookseller's shop, salt still drying on him, and opened a book. He did not, in that moment, know what he was beginning. He could not have known. He had merely refused, in the first hours after the loss, to close the window. He had let the question of what to do next remain open long enough for a different answer to enter. And when the answer came, he followed it. This is perhaps the most practical thing the principle teaches. Not that you should welcome loss, but that when loss comes, you should not be in such a hurry to recover from it that you miss what it might be showing you. The recovery can wait an hour. It can wait a day. The question can be allowed briefly to stand. Most arrangements of life are arrived at without much reflection. They are inherited or drifted into or assembled out of what was available. They function often well enough, but they are rarely chosen in the full sense of being examined and affirmed. Loss creates a moment of involuntary examination. The Stoic counsels you to use that moment before the new arrangement closes over the old. There is, in this, no promise that the examination will yield comfort. Zeno's examination did not yield comfort. It yielded a life in a foreign city of great simplicity and great rigor. He did not, after the wreck, become happier in the way the merchant might have understood happiness. He became instead a different kind of person, for whom the merchant's question of happiness was no longer quite the question. This is the kind of transformation the principle points toward, not improvement of the previous self, replacement by degrees of the previous self with a self who can ask different questions and live by different answers. The merchant who set sail from Citium did not arrive in Athens. The merchant drowned. What walked into the bookseller's shop was already, though it did not yet know it, something else. Consider, in the quiet that closes this lesson, what arrangements of your own life have become invisible to you. Not as a matter of inventory. You cannot list them. They are, by definition, the things you do not see. But you can hold the possibility that there are such things. You can hold the possibility that what you take for the shape of your life is, in fact, only an arrangement of circumstances, no more permanent than the cargo on Zeno's ship, no more chosen, in many cases, than the weather. And you can hold, beside that possibility, this further one, that some loss will come, in time, that breaks the arrangement, not because you wish for it, not because it is good, but because such losses come, in every life, eventually, and yours will not be the exception. When it comes, you will have a choice. You will have a narrow window in which the question of what to do with the rest of your life will stand open before you, undefended by the old habits, and you can rush past it, or you can stop. Zeno stopped. He stopped on a beach. He stopped in a bookseller's shop. He stopped long enough to read and to ask and to follow a man pointed out to him in the street. The stopping was, in retrospect, the philosophy. Everything else, the school, the doctrine, the long teaching in the painted porch, grew from the stopping. The question I would leave you with is not whether you have suffered loss. Everyone has or will. The question is what you did with the window when it opened, whether you let it stand open long enough to see through, or whether, as is more common, you closed it quickly and went on as before, carrying the cargo that had been left to you on the routes you had inherited toward the markets you had been told were the markets that mattered. There is still time in most lives for another window. Watch for it. That is what Zeno would tell you, I think, if you sat with him in the painted porch, while the merchants of Athens passed before the school he had built out of the wreck of his own merchant life. He would tell you to watch, and he would tell you, when the window opens, to stop. I made a prosperous voyage, he said, when I suffered shipwreck. Sit with that for as long as you need.